Gardening gives you back something that's been kind of taken away. You can like pull yourself out of that noise and be in something that's real. And I think it's so easy to forget to have wonder and forget to look. And I know so many gardeners who have ADHD. It's not just a coincidence. For people who have busy minds, there's so many different things going on. People with neurodivergent brains were drawn to like gathering the information that we're interested in. But what I loved was like ingredients and stories and like where did it come from and how did people eat it. It totally is something you get completely obsessed with.
We've had such a great response to the podcast, and so many of you have been in touch asking what you can do to help. It's really simple. Just follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That way we can reach more people, and that way we can celebrate these great minds that think differently. Today we're joined by urban gardener, TV producer and author of Give It a Grow, Martha Swales. After producing hit culinary shows like MasterChef and Nigella Lawson's Cook, Eat, Repeat, Martha turned her focus to sharing her love for gardening. For over a decade, she's been nurturing her own little patch of nature and inspiring millions to do the same. But for Martha, it isn't just about green fingers. Gardening is a way to improve both her physical and mental health, calming her busy ADHD mind, fostering mindfulness, and embracing a slower, more intentional way of life. I absolutely love talking to Martha. We could wax lyrical on growing stuff and nature. Let's get into it. Let's see how great minds think differently. Martha, how would you describe your brain?
Gosh, busy.
Okay.
Relentless, I think, actually. There's just always something going on. It's like a ping pong bouncing around inside a cave, just like constantly. And then there are definitely moments of calm, but I have no control over when it's going to be busy and when it's going to like give me a little rest.
And how do you feel about your brain now you know a bit more about how it works?
I have probably a love-hate relationship with it. I definitely think there's a lot of strengths to having a very busy mind, but I think it does still, catch me out sometimes, particularly if I've got to do something or if I'm really busy. And I think at the moment I am really busy. I was like feeling absolutely fantastic the last couple of weeks, being like, yes, everything's going really well. And then this week there's just loads of things, and next week there's loads of things. And so suddenly I'm like, it's too much and I can't keep track of it. And I feel like I'm being like squashed by a rock. So I think that's when I start to be like more kind of frantic. And on the days where it's like, I can do whatever I want today and I'm going to do this and that'll be nice, then I can be a bit calmer. Although if I get to the end of the day and haven't done anything, then I'm like, oh, what a wasted day, what a disaster. So I think quite difficult to please in a way, quite sort of, constantly nothing is enough.
Sounds hungry.
Yeah, hungry. Yeah, that's it. I definitely feel like I need to feed things in all the time, which is funny because I think my kind of like persona in the content that I make is very soothing and calm.
I was sat in the car this morning watching the Tiny Pond video. And if I'm really honest, I'm thinking, okay, I know a bit about ponds. Let's have a look. It's the Tiny Pond. And I'm sitting there welling up listening to you. And I'm sitting there thinking, tadpoles are f***ing magic, aren't they?
Yeah.
Isn't that such a beautiful, magical thing, regardless of like how big the pond is, what kind of frog it is, etc. That just took me straight back to like being a kid.
Yeah.
And your voice is incredibly soothing and just poetic.
When I'm at home or meeting people out, I'm either like really quiet or I can't stop talking. And like, I almost do it. It's like almost like I'm soothing myself, I think. And I think that in a way, anxious people understand other anxious people, and you're kind of like tapping into how do you like calm down your own like central nervous system. And the sense of wonder, I think, is totally genuine. I feel like a garden allows you to hone in on tiny details and just be amazed. It's almost like, at the end of Men in Black, where they've got like the cat with the universe on it, and you zoom in and you zoom in and you zoom in. And a garden can actually be that. You can have a huge garden you have a tiny garden, but there's like layers upon layers. And when you look closer, you see more. And like recently I was like, I want to get a microscope and look at my soil. I haven't got one yet, but it's like, I believe there's more layers and more layers that I can start unpacking. And I think it's so easy to forget to have wonder and forget to look. And so just reminding people that it's there seems to tap into something for people. And my pond was one of the first videos I did that like went kind of viral. It is that sense of kind of time and how special something is when you take the time to either look after it or look at it and just appreciate it.
But also it's not on our time, right? It's happening. It doesn't happen fast. You know, it doesn't happen at the speed at which our lives seem to move at and my brain, your brain works at. There's this nature doesn't hurry, yet everything is accomplished is a brilliant quote because it doesn't hurry.
No, and I think that it's why it's maybe good for people who are so busy because you're forced to have patience.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hate waiting. I imagine you hate waiting.
Yep.
I'll like sow some seeds and I'll be like, 6 months. But like, it's important because that's why I understand the wonder of it, because I've been forced to wait. And I can watch all the stages kind of unfold. And when I get the thing at the end, it's so much more valuable.
I love gardening. I'm pretty, as you have learnt this morning, obsessed with trees.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to take I'm probably more active in managing and starting to manage this little 4-acre forest we have. And actually the active involvement of being part of that, coppicing hazel and looking after it and being involved in it, I think is better for biodiversity and better with that kind of management, but also it's just way more rewarding.
Yeah. It's sort of unlocking the potential of nature, and it can do its own thing, but there's so many other things it can do if you kind of intervene, I guess. I grafted my own aubergines for the first time last year. So grafting, ancient method of taking two plants and kind of joining them together so that you get benefits from both halves. Done all the time with fruit trees, but you can do it with things like tomatoes and aubergines as well. So I grew my little tomato rootstock and my aubergine, and then I cut them in half with a scalpel, stuck them together, and they grew into one plant. And you're kind of like, wow, like if you let nature take its course, great. But you wouldn't know that you can stick two plants together and they'll grow into one. And then you'll get like bigger fruits and more resilience and a huge root system. So yes, I think gardening is about kind of interfering in a productive way.
I've been waiting for a moment with a guest to be able to talk about this. So I'm really, really glad you're here. So I'm probably the only person in the world who has peas tattooed on their knuckles.
Yes.
And I know quite a lot about peas. And talking of like sort of human involvement, I was really lucky to be able to visit the trials and laboratory where the sugar snap pea was first bred in 1979.
Okay.
In Boise, Idaho, with the family of Calvin Lambourne, who bred the first sugar snap pea, which was a grafting of two pea varieties together to be able to basically create an edible pod.
Yeah.
And you're just like, that's a great involvement of human ingenuity.
Yeah.
To do that rather than just being so passive.
Oh, like completely. Cabbages are basically all from the same plant. So you've got a wild plant, Brassica oleracea, and you might see it, growing on just kind of scrubland. It's got little yellow flowers. And from that, you've got cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale. They all have the same Latin name because they are the same plant. And it's just through like selection. So like people sometimes get confused between that and like genetic.
Yes.
It's like, no, it's like, okay, you've got a cabbage that has got a particularly big like head and you keeping the seeds from the same thing, or you pick for the side shoots or you pick for the root. And the more times you pick that characteristic over and over again, you end up with different like cultivars of the same thing. And so, yeah, that and the peas are an amazing example of taking the potential, the genetic potential locked away in nature and being able to like, yes, bend it a bit to human will. But I think what then comes back is when you enter into the act of growing it, you are once again at kind of the will of nature.
Yeah.
So you kind of can do as much of this as you like and end up with the seed that you want to grow the thing. And then you're back to a situation where you're like, well, is the sun going to come out? Is a slug going to eat it? Like, which actually I find to be a bit of a relief because it absolves me of some responsibility.
100%.
I don't have to be perfect because I'm not entirely responsible. I can do my best to set it up in a way that gives it the best chance.
Yep.
And then after that, it's up to nature to kind of decide.
Yep.
So yeah, it's kind of like this back and forth. I think it's like there's so many layers of the relationship from when you're growing the thing to where it came from in the first place and everything in between.
Tell me about your diagnosis.
So it was 2 years ago, I think. It took me about a year to get an appointment. I did go privately.
Why did you even pursue a diagnosis?
So I definitely have times when I struggle more, and it's when things are really busy. Kind of ties up with lots of kind of like anxiety and just feeling like there's too much going on. And like, why can't I keep up with simple things like my laundry, which I know is just such a cliche.
And what did you know about ADHD at that time?
I sort of knew as much as like, you know, you get the sort of, I think I'd actually got the kind of like form with the sort of tick boxes, even like a year before that or 2 years before that, and kind of ummed and ahed and like, did I want to spend a lot of money on it and all of this kind of stuff, and like, what was it going to actually help me with? And I'm sort of still unpacking. It was actually my mum in the end who at first was like, well, I don't know, you know, if you have. And then she was the one that was like, well, I think you should just get it tested because then you'll know. And then like, we don't have to keep revisiting this conversation. Incidentally, I think if there's anyone who might have ADHD, it is my mum. I love her very much, but I've started...
The apple does not fall far.
Yeah. I mean, like, trying to have a conversation with her is wild.
Okay.
It just never stays on the same track, and you never get to the end of a sentence before she's on to another thing. So she was actually the one that finally said, do it, and I'll give you some of the money towards it. And so the kind of like felt more accessible thing to do.
Has there been a pattern of people telling you that you need to do things or alerting you to things that maybe you don't see? You're laughing.
Yeah. Do you know what? Like, I've had the same friends for many years. Like, I'm friends with people I went to primary school with, and I'm friends with my friends from uni. We go on holiday every year. And yeah, I feel like I'm the kind of person that people feel very able to give feedback to. Sometimes I'm like, oh God, not again. Like, what have I done this time? But yeah,
why
definitely.
do you think that is?
Because I think I'm quite receptive. You know, I do tend to blame myself anyway, but I kind of think, oh, okay, if they've said that, then I should think about that. And then sometimes I feel a bit like, what can I do about it? I don't really know what to fix. So examples being, I used to be really bad at interrupting people, asking people things about themselves, just like things that I find really embarrassing because it makes me seem very like self-involved. Whereas I think it was just like, I just didn't know when to stop and I couldn't think of what to ask people. I wasn't interested. I just didn't really know where to like get started.
Yeah.
So one of my best friends was like, you just need to remember to ask other people things. And I'd be like, okay. And she's like, you know, it'd be like, I'd ask someone where they went to uni and when they'd tell me, I'd go, okay. And then I'd tell them a story that I knew about the place. And she's like, you could say to them, did you enjoy it? And this is so embarrassing, but like 10 years later, I still do that. I'll be like, what was it like? Which is funny because I have to talk to people all the time and I've had to talk to people all through my career working in telly.
What did you feel when the assessment finished? I
got really upset. Yeah. I didn't expect to, but like I burst into tears and I just like cried loads, which is weird because like I didn't do anything about it for a year.
Okay. Did you tell anyone?
Yeah, I told people, but I wasn't like, do you know what's funny is it's almost a bit like being queer. It wasn't like I came out and told everyone about that either. And this was kind of a similar thing. Like I would tell some people, but I didn't go, wow, this was a eureka moment that changed my life. And I would say the same of kind of both for me. I've been like, okay, well, that's just that. And I'll sort of take some time to process what I think about it. And in reality, I still am with like the ADHD, I think. And kind of 1 minute I'll be like, I'm fine. And the next minute I'm like, wow, I'm really struggling. And like, can I give myself the grace to be like, this is why? Or is it just a failure on my part? So I guess that's kind of part of it.
And where are you at with that self-talk, self-blame?
I think I'm being a bit more
kindness piece.
Yeah, the kindness piece. The kindness piece is difficult because I think I've always been my own like biggest critic, right? But I think getting there, I actually did try like medication before Christmas. And I did it because I'd been doing a job over the summer, which I was like kind of struggling with concentration. I was working from home. I was really having to like self-motivate. By the time I got around to doing the medication, I wasn't working. And then I was like, I'm not working, and I was being really critical about myself for that. So then I was like, why am I even taking this? And so I did it for a bit, and then I didn't. And now I'm kind of thinking, oh, it was quite nice, but do I need? So it's kind of goes back and forth all the time. But that's it. There's like the self-doubt is constant, and the cycle is like relentless. That's all part of the way my brain anyway works. So it's like I can't ever land on a decision. It's never like, oh, I'm finally here, that's it. It's like, I've written a book recently, and it's like right up to the end, it was like, I want to change this, I want to do that. And it's still like I had a moment of like relief when it went to the printers. And then once it was printed, I was like, oh, I want to change this bit. Yeah. So that's like how it is all the time.
Okay.
And it'd be nice to reach a place of like peace, but that is the most elusive thing. So it's still an ongoing process, I think, for me.
Yeah, no, I was diagnosed autistic ADHD just over 2 years ago. Yeah. And it is like, to get some good veg analogies in here, it is the onion peeling, and I sort of feel like I'm only realizing things when I'm meant to realize them, and that's not all in one go, and it's not all at once, but it is it's sort of this background process of, that makes sense now. Yeah. Or
I suppose it's like, I don't want to like pathologize my personality, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but I literally do all of these things. And it's actually my girlfriend so often says to me when I'm like having a moment of self-doubt, she's like, no, you are. I'm around you. It's other people that see it more than I do, because I'm used to me. This is how the world works. My version of it is the one that I understand. But when I'm like wide awake at 5 a.m. and I just cannot stop thinking, and then like, she wakes up because I'm awake. And then, it's all part of that. And being reminded actually is really a helpful reinforcement. And now my mum's totally on board as well. She loves it. She'll be like, well, yes, can you imagine when you were a child, it was like this? And like, it was, it's because I was pretty full on.
Do you look back and it makes sense?
100%. That was one of the biggest things. Like school was really hard. I hated it. And like couldn't stop talking, was always in trouble. Like I'm talking like when I was really little. I'm talking like primary school. Constantly getting sent out of class. I was never like a intentionally naughty child. Mm-hmm. I think that's what my mum would say about me. She's like, you were so busy, but you weren't like manipulative or malicious. It was just like so busy, And then like when I was at school, trying to put that in a classroom wasn't a good...
Yeah, not in a box.
Yes, it was, and like I would just be completely like, sometimes beside myself, to be honest, like scream the place down. Like it's funny to look back, because I sort of think, well, you wouldn't have thought when I was in primary school that I would sort of turn out to be a functioning like member of society at some points, but here we are to a degree. So yeah, it definitely makes sense looking back. And I think it makes sense for my mum as well. Once she knew, she was like, oh, okay. And I think she probably was able to not maybe take as much responsibility or blame for herself, that this child was just like a lot.
I think, we hear a lot of the sort of, why do I need to get a label? What's going to be different? That kind of, well, if I know, and I don't really need, go and see someone, don't need to spend the money, don't want to go on a waiting list, sort of, what's the point? Actually, the point increasingly becomes about people around us. Yeah. And family and loved ones. Because I think if we're just left to exist in our own little worlds, right, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And we will just think that everything's normal and we'll do as we do. But it's the sort of the swirl and the impact of our behaviour on other people. Yeah. I don't know. I do think that it's not just an individual kind of thing.
It's so relational to other people, and it's so about the way that you relate to other people. And I think, for me, it was definitely so that I could stop beating myself up about whether I was or not. But other people around me have been forgiving with me because of it, in a way that I haven't been forgiving of myself.
Yes.
So I sort of have an arrangement with my girlfriend now where she does do all the laundry. And I go, I'm really sorry. She's like, but you do so many other things for me, so it's okay.
Yeah, but even that that's a on the face of it, it's laundry. Like, we all do it. It happens.
Honestly, life-changing.
But actually the impact on you, that has a massive impact, right?
Yeah, completely. And I'm so grateful for her. It kind of reminds me of a process of reciprocal altruism was what it was called when I studied at university, which is the example I can think of is bats. So a bat comes back having had a meal, and there's another bat that hasn't managed to find any food that night. And so the really full bat will give a bit of their food to the really hungry bat because it will save that bat's life.
Yes.
And it's worth much more to the other bat to give them a little bit, and you aren't really missing out. And then on another night when you're starving, the other bat will give you something back.
Yes.
And actually you get twice as much when they give it to you than you give away each time you give.
Yep.
And so, I think that's kind of idea of what can you help each other with that benefits both of you whilst not taking too much away from you at the same time, so you can both kind of thrive. I think it's worth so much more to me than people could understand, because it seems so silly that I can't get on top of my own laundry like I'm a grown up, but it literally, not having to think about it, frees me up to be a better version of myself.
I get it. No, but it's a win-win.
Yeah. And for both of you. And it's okay, this will save your life. It just means I've got a bit less to eat tonight, but I've got enough anyway. And it's that kind of trade-off, and it's finding those things that you can do to exchange with each other that help both of you to function better and be happier.
Yeah, and you only can do that if you have a good understanding of how you work and why you do what you do and how you thrive and what you're good at. When are you at your best?
When am I at my best?
Give me when you are just absolutely in the zone.
On fire.
What conditions do you need?
Sometimes it can be, if I'm in the right state of mind, so in television I direct. On a bad day.
I'm not talking about bad days.
On a good day. So when I'm at my absolute peak as director and I've got a whole team of people and we're going out on location and I've got to get everyone up in the zone and know exactly where we're going, what's happening next and who's doing what and why we're here and what the story is and have we covered this and have we got those shots and can I keep the energy up even when it's pissing it down and the wind is going absolutely crazy, everyone's freezing cold, and I can do that and feel really alive because of it and feel like I'm really on top of things. But I'd say on a day like that, when I'm kind of in the zone, I'm excited about what we're doing, and those days can be quite relentless and it can be difficult to, when it's working, I can hold lots of things in my mind at once. So that's when I'm in it, I think. But that is exhausting.
Yes.
So then you're crash. But and there's been series that I have series produced and directed the whole series, and that's two different jobs. Burnt myself out doing things like that before, but I've often thought I did do a good job of that, and not everyone could have done it. That's what I've thought, especially on small budgets and tight turnarounds and things like that. And I think within that there's an attention to detail about what I want and what we need and being able to build that picture for the edit and make sure we've got all the stuff that we need. So it's just so many things happening at once, right?
Yeah. You've worked, I will blow your trumpet for a second, Martha. You've worked with, some of the biggest chefs, big shows, MasterChef, big productions, not just in the UK, all over the world. Yeah, you've been on absolute fire doing that. And so I'm therefore, and maybe listeners and watchers are thinking the same, I'm continually struck by, you can do that, right? And you can go, all these people, all these different million things you're keeping in your head.
Yeah.
And yet you can't get out the door in the morning, this morning, and you're late and you've chosen the wrong road.
I know.
What is that about?
I know. And it's funny because I'm late when I've got to see my friends, but I'm the one writing a schedule and being okay, that's not going to be long enough. We need to make sure, and that's not realistic. And this is how long it's actually going to take to move the kit from there to there. So I can see the whole day. And actually when I'm directing and it's my responsibility and in the moment, I'm not someone who actually runs over. I'm we need to be here. We need to be doing this. But the minute I relax for a second, it's possible. I think it requires a lot of energy. And so I can never turn up to anything at my friends. Today, I was oh, I actually have to leave in 10 minutes and I don't know where my clothes are and my hair's wet. And I'm why do I do this every single time? But
you wouldn't do that on a shoot.
No.
No way.
If we're there and we go, I'll get there. If I have to, I can do it, which makes it sound like it's totally within my control and I'm just choosing not to. There's things that when I apply myself to something, I have been lucky that it often goes quite well. And so I don't think, sometimes a friend of mine recently who I told about ADHD, I hadn't seen her for a couple of years, and she was like, wow, but you do all these things and you like can do all these things. So like she almost was sort of in a disbelief about it. I guess it's that you can still succeed, but you have a different way of getting there. And I think everyone has different kinds of struggles. I'm not saying it's like more difficult. It's just that like there are things I find difficult that maybe other people don't. And working in telly for years, I always looked at the people who I thought were really diligent and really like, you know, they could just sit down and do stuff. And I just felt so inadequate. And I was like, I'm never going to. And then I realised that probably what I have to offer, I do have really great attention to detail when I'm like in it. But I realised that I have something else to offer, which is like enthusiasm and knowledge and like creativity. And even saying this, I'm kind of embarrassed saying it because like I spend so much time being like, I'm not these things. You have a trade-off, right? Like there's things, and in a way that's what makes you successful is you've got something a bit different. I spent so many years thinking I wasn't good enough because I didn't do it the way that other people did. I tried to leave telly. I drove vans for a female removal company for a summer and I was like, that's it. I'm just no good at this and like I'm not moving up. I couldn't think of anything else to do, to be honest. I sat there for like 3 months beating myself up about what else I was going to do, and then I was like, well, I'll go back to telly. I've run out of money. So I went back and I had a much better view on it, and suddenly it all kind of took off, and then lots of things just fell into place. Like I got a lot of opportunities. I think the one that really changed my career, I was like 28, I'd just become a producer, and I got asked about producing on a 10-part travel show. And when I took the job and turned up, I realised there wasn't really anyone else on it apart from me and my researcher. There was like a camera guy meeting us on location in Egypt. So I was like, oh, okay, we've got 4 weeks. We're doing 10 episodes and like I'm basically in charge of this thing. And that was like a total life-changing moment for me, because before that I had worked for someone that made me feel like I was doing everything wrong. I was constantly like full of self-doubt. I thought I can't go anywhere in telly because I'm just so anxious. I can't do this. And then I realised it was like the management style of the person I was working for. And when I had to do it myself, and when it was like crazy, I mean, we filmed 5 episodes in Egypt, we filmed in Bahrain, we filmed in Dubai, we went to Malta, like in Cairo, we were in Luxor. It was like busy and hectic and you're having to change plans all the time. And like, I had no experience. I'd never been in an edit. I didn't even really know what I was trying to put together. But it was like life-changing because I came back and I made this series and it worked and everyone was really happy. And I was like, wow, I can do that. I can do that, which is so many, often in telly you don't get to just jump up and be given an opportunity. So I suddenly realised that, you know, I could do things having been so doubting of myself.
Let's talk about gardening.
Yeah.
Why do you think you love gardening?
I need gardening. I don't think it's even just like I just enjoy it, because what I think it is incredibly engaging. And I think that's what I struggle with, is finding things that I can commit my mind to for long enough. You know, it's like bouncing around, and that's because a negative thing is taking all of the attention. And then when I need to do something I don't want to do, I can't make it do that. And like the thing about a garden is there are so many layers and so many things going on, and it changes throughout the seasons, that like I step out in my garden, I don't have to think about what I'm going to do. I just like follow, I let my brain kind of like lead me. And I think that's really like an act of like self-love and nourishment. And I love the kind of layers of knowledge there are. Like, can I recognize that plant from that leaf, or can I remember how that grows and what it needs, and when did I plant it last year, and when did I harvest it, and what sort of weather does it like? So you're building up a catalogue of knowledge, which I think like people with neurodivergent brains, we're drawn to like gathering the information that we're interested in. Same as like food, you know, all the programs I've made have been about food. I've worked in kitchens. I love cooking. But what I loved was like ingredients and stories, and like where did it come from and how did people eat it, more than like even the process of cooking. For me, it's like all of the knowledge around that, and kind of working in an industry where I could always like find out more and there was always new stuff to learn. I think a garden is the same. And then I think also for me, the food element is really satisfying. There's a productive element to it. And that's the bit that really caught my attention, because I can kind of like imagine how I'm going to plant them together to get the most out of this, and what can I grow that you can't buy in the shops. And like, there's just an endless, I mean, I'd be at work in my 20s, early 20s, and people would look over and I was meant to be working and I was just looking at seeds. And like, I'd get this glazed look, and someone would say, you're thinking about the allotment again, or you're thinking about like growing stuff again. And it's a place I can go to in my mind, as well as a place that I can be physically. So there's like so many layers to it.
It's immense. The process of growing something and looking after it and then being able to eat it is, as obvious as it sounds, right? Is sadly really rare, that the amount of people that get to do that and do that. Not to fucking talk about me and trees again, but to talk about me and trees again for a second. I'm finding the same reward actually in me being able to take half an hour yesterday to go and cut some silver-birch and sit there and strip the bark and see the moisture and smell the moisture and touch the wood. Just was incredibly grounding.
I think
actually,
if you're someone who's drawn to like sensory experiences, which like obviously neurodivergent people are particularly, then it has so many more layers because you've got like the sense and you've got the feel and like you can, I mean, I used to do a lot of whittling, you know, like just sitting there. And it's interesting because actually that's an incredibly repetitive task, which shouldn't be that interesting. But there's something that you kind of lock into is doing processes, cooking, gardening, making things, that like those kind of things that are where you're, because, you know, like if you always want to move, then like being able to like direct it at something is really like soothing, I think.
It's physical, but doesn't have to be huge exertion, if that makes sense.
No.
You know, carving a spoon or planting some seeds or pruning, you know, plants, like they're not huge, you know, it's not big physical labor.
No, it's not being down the gym.
No, it's a different, but it is using your hands and your body and your senses. I don't know, it's kind of a different feeling.
It's for me that you can get so stuck in your head because it's so noisy that being able to be in the world can bring you like out of yourself. So it's actually very calming for your mind because you can like pull yourself out of that noise and be in something that's real. I wouldn't say it's just calming. It's not just a soothing thing. It's soothing because it's engaging.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives you enough different things happening at the same time.
Yeah, it's got a lovely vibrational rhythm to it that feels quite focused.
Yeah.
My kids like hugging trees now because I've conditioned them to. I made them at the beginning and now it's lovely and I've got absolutely no shame in kind of like hugging trees is a brilliant thing. But having bare skin connected to the natural world, that's again is another like really obvious thing. And then you think about it and you're like, come on guys, when was the last time you felt the ground with your feet or your hands? When was the last time you like really connected? Because, you know, we live mostly in shoes or on floors. We live mostly actually disconnected from the land. You are an exact kind of perfect example of like, you don't need to live in the countryside to do this. And it doesn't have to be a massive garden. And you can like, for people listening, where's a good place to start?
Well, I think one of the most popular things that I've shared with people is growing like what I call green garlic. So it's a good example of how we're used to only ever seeing like one stage of a life cycle of a plant. And that's just like a finished bulb of garlic. And one of the things that I've done is like peel the cloves and put them in a bowl of water so they sprout. But once it gets growing, it will grow into a beautiful like green stem. And it's a bit like green garlic, you know, like chefs love wet garlic, and that's something that's a bit more developed usually. It's sort of 3 months into growing a garlic bulb where it looks like a little leek and it tastes like garlic. You pull it up and the bulb hasn't formed, but you can cook the whole thing. And then you've also got garlic scapes, which is when like hardneck garlic produces a flower stem and you pick them a little bit before you harvest the main garlic, and that can be turned into pesto. The bit is that I grow is the very first immature, like 2-3 weeks in, bit of green garlic. And the reason that I think it's a really good starting point is because you only need a bulb of garlic from the supermarket and a bowl with some water and a windowsill, and it can unlock the excitement about being able to, the transformative power of growing, both of yourself in the kind of sense of wonder, but also just like how things grow and like they transform from one thing to another, and like you can get a lot more out of an edible plant if you can know enough about it to decide what bit you want, what time you want to eat it and how you want to grow it. So I think that's a really good like starting point. And I know it's been like really popular. Similar thing is growing mint from like a stem from the supermarket. So you can get a stem of mint and you can use the leaves to make your mint tea, leave the little few top leaves on, put it in water, it will grow roots. You can then plant it up and it will live for years in a pot. Don't plant it direct in the ground.
Don't plant it in the ground.
My allotment has just got like mint everywhere. And once it goes, you're never going to get it out. But I think those two are really good starting points because it just gives you a sense of something familiar as something else. And that's what gardening can be. And then I'd say if you had like a pot in your garden, the one thing I would pick to grow if you only had one pot and you had a little bit of sun would be tomatoes. And the reason is, I think they're quite easy to get hold of. So if you don't want to like faff around with trying to grow something from seed for the first time, you can just buy a tomato plant in spring. You just need to know whether it's going to grow long or if it's going to be like a little plant that you can do in a hanging basket. And it should say on the label, right? But yeah, I like to grow tomatoes that are known as indeterminate. So they're going to keep growing so you can harvest them over several months. And I think that what is good about tomatoes is they teach you a lot about plants. They are tender, so you have to work out when it's a good time to put them in the garden. But they're actually quite forgiving. So they don't die that easily. And you can pick them over a period of time. Tomatoes are an actually very beautiful and exciting thing to grow yourself. And you can grow some basil in the pot as well. So I think that's a good way to start. I think there's loads of stuff you can grow in pots.
Why do you think ADHDers listening should get gardening?
I think it will change their lives. I've got like no hesitation in saying that people start because they think, oh, it'd be nice to grow a bit of that. And then they become addicted to the whole experience of doing it. And like it just unfolds into so many different avenues that are beneficial to your mind and like your sense of kind of like groundedness and joy and like rhythms of the seasons. Like it kind of gets you into a different mindset that I think just makes you appreciate everything a little bit more and yeah, allows you to have what my girlfriend would call my special interest. But I just think like once you get started, there's no going back. And I think I've watched that happen so many times. And I know so many gardeners who have ADHD. So for me, it just seems to be like, it's not just a coincidence.
Yeah, we've had Heston Blumenthal's been on here, Doug McMaster. We talked a lot about ADHD and cooking and the kitchen. And there's a similar kind of, I feel like they're similar environments for, in totally different ways. And obviously they're connected, but, you've got tools, you got to plan stuff, there's a bit of trepidation of like, oh my God, there's frost, or oh my God, it's raining, or oh my God, the slugs are there. There's a little bit of risk as there is with knives and fire and stuff in the kitchen. There's process, there's time management to it, there's sequencing, there's an order of events, and there's a zone that you can get in because you're probably working with your hands and it's really sensory.
Yeah. And it's very creative. People think gardening, it's not necessarily got a hugely good reputation and it does seem to be governed by a lot of rules. And there are things that are really useful to know about gardening. But ultimately, I think there's a huge possibility for creativity and freedom. And like, what do you want to grow and how do you want to grow it? What tomato do you want to grow? You can pick from 100 different kinds.
Yes.
And you can't buy them in the shops. So I think, it's incredibly creative and it's part of the process and it's something that's absorbing and exciting enough for people who have busy minds. There's so many different things going on. And it totally is something you get completely obsessed with.
And clearly, because you have built a whopping following, Martha, like clearly people want to see this stuff and engage with it.
Yeah, I think more than ever. Gardening gives you back something that's been kind of taken away. So our ability to do something for ourselves from scratch. I'm sure I'm not the only one that when you read about how things like used to be done in terms of the processes and the way that people used to have to make things and there was a person whose job it was to make things and every day they got to go to work and make things and now so many of us sit in an office. And so many people I think feel like they don't love that environment. It's because actually for the whole of the rest of history, so many people were able to be useful by doing things that had an outcome. And it's so easy to just feel like we're kind of a little bit of a cog in a machine. You go into a supermarket, and I shop in the supermarket, my garden is not big enough to feed me. You kind of go in and you pick that up and you don't know where it came from and you don't know how it grew and you don't really know what the plant is or what it's related to or where it came from. And then you go home and like, yeah, people then get to enjoy the cooking process. But what growing does is it extends it. People that love food, I think it allows you to, it's like fermenting or making sourdough. You get to extend the process. You get to have more ownership over it. You get to be more involved. It's like when you make something that yourself, even if it's not very good. And I always think of, in his Dark Materials trilogy, there's the idea of like dust and it's consciousness. So a piece of wood has no dust, but a carving has dust. And it's like, it sticks to things that you've like paid attention to. It's always something that kind of pops into my head because I'm like, you've made this thing through your own consciousness and your action on it into something of value.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think there's a massive overlap between cooking and gardening and ADHD. And I love all of them.
It's a perfect storm, isn't it? It's just like perfect conditions, perfect environment in which you thrive in and other people can thrive in too.
Yeah.
That can actually, I think probably on, the outside, it can look quite daunting of like, I got a house plant and fuck, I can't even look after that.
Yeah.
And
I kill houseplants because I don't think I just forget they're there because they're not grabbing my attention enough.
Yeah.
Apart from ones that are really nice that I've spent time keeping alive. And then the ones that I've just like, have ended up back there, haven't been watered. I just forget because it needs to keep me constantly. Like I need to know that I have to check on it. Otherwise I'll forget. Whereas if I'm like, oh, I need, what's it doing today? Keeps you involved.
I think we've kind of gone, you grow things outside and houseplants are inside. And that's, the black and white boxes that we put it in. And I guess what I see you do and what is the reality of what can happen is like, you can grow food inside. Yeah. Guess what? Who knew? And that is daily. It's there. You can see it. You can watch it change. Most of these houseplants don't do anything.
No, they just stay the same. Yeah, exactly. It's like evolving.
They're ornamental.
Yeah, completely. I mean, you can grow microgreens in a week, right? So that's like instant gratification.
Yep.
You can literally see the outcome really quickly. You can choose from lots of different varieties and then you can like make something that looks fancy that you couldn't easily buy in the shops. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of things. I mean, the garlic and the mint and herbs and microgreens and all of that you can do indoors. I got an allotment because I was so obsessed, but I've lived in flats with no outdoor space a lot. And I kind of wish, somebody asked me recently, what would I have done differently? And I was like, I used to think I could only go really far across London to my allotment to grow food. And because it was so big and I had to fill it and I was obsessed with that, I forgot to think about like, what can I just have here? So I'd come back with like these huge harvests of like stuff and then I'd be like, this sort of burden of like, what am I going to do with it all now? But I had windowsills and occasionally like there was a flat that I lived in with my mates and there was a garden and it's like, I used to go across London to my allotment, but I didn't grow anything in the garden apart from like the stuff I was going to take to the allotment. And now I look back and I'm like, but I was just like, that's where I do that.
Yeah.
And this...
Yeah.
And I've got so much space there. Why would I bother doing something here? But actually, since I've had my own garden, which has been about 2.5 years, that's when all the social media and everything kind of took off, was because it was outside my back door. And growing an allotment is hard because you go like once a week, once every 2 weeks, you plant something, you come back, it's gone. You feel really defeated so often. And I know last year in particular was like the worst year for slugs and snails or for any new gardeners or for any gardeners ever. And being able to grow stuff outside my back door is like, wow, it's just there and I can go and check on it and it doesn't have to go for like 8 hours to the allotment and like, how am I going to get there and all of this? I can just like pop outside my back door. And the things that I've grown in my own garden, it's very sunny, but the tomatoes, the plants have just been like supercharged. I mean, they are like, I don't know whether it's because I'm like, am I doing anything different to the soil? Like I do the same sort of process. I like top dress with organic matter and, do no dig and it's organic. But like the tomatoes on the allotment are like half the size. And I don't know if it's just because like when you pay something attention, it just does better. When people talk about talking to plants, the thing is that you're just noticing them.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, today there's loads of caterpillars on that. Well, I'm like, oh, so I'm going to like take them off. Whereas if that was on the allotment, by the time I got there, there'd be no cabbages left.
Yeah. You're able to be more present.
And like responsive, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You can see it on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. As an ADHDer, what do you find challenging about gardening?
Getting around to doing things in the order they need to be done.
Okay.
Yeah, like I sit here and I'm like, I've been meaning to sow like early peas for like 2 weeks. And I think it's got harder because of social media, because I so often used to just impulsively do things and now I think I have to film that.
Yeah.
And so it's a totally different thing. And some days I just give myself the time off. I'll be like, I'm going to go into the garden. But it's quite hard for me because I'm always thinking I need to be doing this and that. But it takes me sometimes 10 hours to edit a video. I might have an hour of footage that I've collected over 3 years. And I sit there for, the amount of time and like energy it takes. And that's definitely something that I kind of like really can hyperfixate on. But it is tiring. And so I sometimes put off doing it. So when I can just go out into the garden and give myself the freedom to just garden as I used to do, that's really nice. But yeah, getting around to doing the things that I say I'm going to do. And I get so excited. I buy so many seeds and then I don't plant a lot of them. Or like, I was thinking about my sweet potato I grew last year and I was like, the leaves are edible. I should definitely do something about that. And then in the middle of the summer, I was doing a job and then, before you know it, it's autumn and I haven't eaten the leaves. And I'm like, I'm going to have to wait another year now to be able to do that again. So that's the thing is like, you miss the window.
Yeah.
You can't just go, it's not like a recipe. You don't just get to do it again.
No.
So that's it, just trying to keep on top of all the things I want to do. And, being too ambitious with how much space I've got. I run out of containers, I run out of ground. And in the middle of the summer, I'm like, it's just a jungle and I want to do another thing, but I've got nowhere left to do it. Yeah, just kind of managing my own expectations and keeping up with all of the kind of like, because it's a series of windows and that can be really helpful because you can be like, I have to do this now. Or it can be unhelpful because you're like, I've missed it. Now I've got to wait.
So I've pre-ordered your book. Tell me about the book.
So I kind of came up with an idea that was based around what I knew was popular on my Instagram. And that is like easy to do, accessible projects that are still like fun and teach you something in the process. And I spent last year writing the book. And I've learned a lot. My version of it being accessible and easy to read isn't necessarily just stripping it down to like really basic, like bullet point sentences. I'm taking you with me. I'm telling you how I do it. I'm giving you a story to go along with it about how I grew it the first time or why I grow it. I have to let people really in on how it works. And I think because with the Instagram, I only have like a minute or 90 seconds to do that. It's been really nice to kind of explain why. And I think that I've picked things hopefully that teach people something in addition to just like, how do you grow the thing? Like an example, not necessarily the most exciting thing in the book, but just as a for example, people always ask me about coriander. And in the book, I've got a project where you plant it in succession. So you do one pot and then like 4 weeks later, you plant another pot. And that's because so many people may not know that coriander doesn't last for very long. It's not your fault. That's just how it grows, right? Yep. So if you then understand what that project is, then you understand that you're not failing, but you know what plants, what herbs only live for like a few months and what ones are going to live for years. Yeah. And so all of them hopefully have a little bit of that kind of logic to them, which make you feel like you understand a garden. Yeah. Rather than just like, how do you plant this thing?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I think, you look at seed packets and they kind of, they show you the calendar and they tell you what conditions it likes. They don't tell you the sort of like, and by the way, here's the real killer piece of information.
Yeah.
Here's the real tip.
Yeah.
I
think sometimes they sort of almost assume more knowledge. Like the thing I said about cucumbers is I've killed hundreds of cucumbers. I still sometimes kill cucumbers, but that's because they're really tender. And if you didn't know that, the first year I ever grew a cucumber, I bought one from the garden centre because it was out in the garden centre in March and I took it home. I was living with my parents at the time, it's my early 20s. And my mum said, that's going to die. And I was like, it was for sale in the garden centre. I think it's fine. And next morning I come out, it's completely dead. They're selling you it in the garden centre and I didn't know anything about plants. So I thought, well, if it's there, then I can plant it in the garden. Yeah. So like, that's the first thing I tell people is cucumbers are like really, they're not tricky, but they're temperamental and they're tender. They're much more tender than other tender plants like a tomato. And so those are the kind of things I really hope that people will get from it. And it's a whole mixture of different things. A lot of it is growing veg. Yep. Because that's like, and fruit and herbs. And then there's wildlife projects like the pond. And then there's a little bit about growing flowers as well. So
I'm going to get my kids this weekend to make a tiny pond.
Yeah. That has been the thing that people have done the most. And people have like sent me videos of their kids when their first frog arrives. And like my PT from the gym built one with his daughter. And I think it is just like the best wildlife thing you can do in your garden, I think.
I mean, actually, to be honest, even if my kids don't want to do it, I'm fucking doing it. I've decided.
Yeah, definitely.
It's called Give It a Grow.
Give It a Grow,
which is a really fun name. And you've also had some amazing people endorse the book, which, I was just like, wow, there's like Chef Glitterati, Otterlenghi's and Fernley Whittingstalls and Nigella Law. Like, there's a lot of praise.
It was really nice. I found it really difficult to ask people if they would be willing to have a look at a copy of it, and I felt really embarrassed. A lot of these are people that I have known over the years but not seen for a very long time. Like Yotam, I did a show with when I was 24, and I was like, do I ask him? Does he even remember who I am? Like, I've just been kind of blown away. Hugh did me one, Nigella's done one, Nadia, Michelle Rue, my friend James Wong. So yeah, it's been,
And when it's out, March 6th?
It is out March the 6th, so perfect time to start getting out in the garden.
Yeah, I mean, that is a perfect time.
That is it, because it's just early enough that people can actually start to get ready, and then it will all start warming up, and you get the full range of things that you can grow.
Then it gets busy, doesn't it?
And then it's exciting,
Then it is all... We're all in the dormant period now, but it's about to ramp up.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd like to give you a green dot badge, one for you.
Thank you very much.
Who would you like to give the second one to?
I'm going to give the second one to my mum, because as I said, I think she might be as yet undiagnosed, but she's also just been like my absolute gardening inspiration and someone that I love very dearly. But she's an incredible gardener. She's who I've dedicated my book to. And when I was younger, I was always like, oh, there's not really cooking in my family. I haven't got this heritage of cooking. And like, we didn't. And I suddenly realised only just recently that I had it about gardening instead. And I'm really grateful to her. And I think she is an unusual and wonderful person. And so I'm going to give it to her.
Like, I'm excited to know you. I'm excited to do my tiny pond. And just, it's a great reminder to me of the power of like getting your hands dirty and trying to grow stuff. And thank you.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely, because I normally am like slightly hidden behind all of my content, and this has been an opportunity to share a bit more about what's going on behind the scenes. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.